We're a country of 60, 70 million. It only needs a couple of dozen to be in these categories to create real dangers to particular individuals who don't even know they're targeted.
Detectives are now investigating whether the suspect in the alleged murder of Anne Widdecombe was planning violence against other high-profile figures, including Reform UK politicians. So do politicians need more security, and should the taxpayer fund that? Mike Freer was a Conservative MP in Finchley and Golders Green in North London. His office was set alight in an arson attack in 2023, and he stood down at the general election the following year because of the fire as well as death threats he'd received. He sent us this voice note with his views on security for MPs and former MPs. He says he's still being targeted, even though he's no longer in Parliament.
I had an individual who had, on 3 occasions, had to have police intervention, and including after one intervention, the person had to be sectioned, contact me after I'd stepped down. Doesn't appear to have realised I was no longer a member of Parliament. And when I called the police, I was simply told to call 111. Sadly, when you're no longer a member of Parliament, despite whatever history of incidents you've had, you're simply a member of the public. So there is a case for MPs who have stepped down for whatever reason to have their security reviewed, particularly if they've been subject to attacks in the past.
Malcolm Rifkind is a former chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee, as well as a former Conservative Foreign Secretary. We can speak to now. Malcolm, morning to you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Do you think things are getting worse? Can we start with there? I mean, you were in politics for a very long time. Do you think it's now more dangerous to be a politician than it perhaps was back then?
Well, at this particular moment, it probably is more dangerous because the combination of the issues out there in the country, as it were, which have polarized people, but also social media allows people anonymously to plot and have fantasies and so forth, which may lead to political violence. But it is nothing new that members of Parliament or political people have been potential threats. During most of the period I was in Parliament and in government, we had the IRA. And the IRA, as we know, were responsible for killing several MPs, and not to mention the Brighton bombing. So at any time in our history, that has been a problem. It comes for 2 reasons. First of all, there can be people who have fanatical views and try to behave in such a disgraceful way. But there's also people with mental health problems. And we're a country of 60, 70 million. It only needs a couple of dozen to be in these categories to create real dangers to particular individuals who don't even know they're targeted.
Do you think there's enough transparency generally about who gets what level of security? I mean, one of the things that Reform UK have said, that Nigel Farage doesn't get enough security considering just how much he is subject to threats on a daily basis.
Well, the whole point about security is that somebody who is threatening an individual should not be aware of exactly how the security is utilized. You know, some people get full-time security. When I was Foreign Secretary, that was the only time in government, incidentally, that I actually had personal protection. But during that period, obviously, I had someone with me all the time, and I suspect that person was armed. I never asked them, but that was the assumption. Virtually everybody else does not get that kind of protection, but you don't specify in public what they do get, because that is inviting bad, evil people to try and work their way around these forms of protection.
But is it plausible, do you think, that someone like Nigel Farage doesn't get enough? Because what he would say is that he's constantly subject to...
How do you define enough?
Well, that's the question. Good question.
Well, quite. Now, it is this is an entirely legitimate question you're asking, and there's no simple answer to that, because you can't expect the government to provide literally thousands of protection officers 24 hours a day for thousands of people without that being a massive burden and probably impossible to deliver. So there is a system. I'm not familiar with the detail of it, but there's a very reputable system when an individual may be at threat, and sometimes you know that in advance because of the nature of the job they have or because they're such a public figure, or if circumstances make them a potential threat. There are people who are expert in trying to work that out and to then authorize that level of protection, whether it's personal protection or protection with the person's home or the car they use or just advice in some cases. It depends on how public they are and how real the threats that they are receiving. Many of the threats that people do receive, and one must assume, are bogus. They're deliberately intended to frighten people without any serious expectation that they will actually be attacked. But you don't know that in advance, so you can't take that for granted.
Do you think the role of a British MP might have to shift in terms of what we regard as as their general behaviour. You know, that notion of a British MP living within their community, open surgeries, standing outside the supermarket, being very accessible, being very gettable, I suppose, is the sad reality of that. That's been true for what feels like decades and decades and decades.
Well, yeah, I know what you're saying, and obviously it might change, it might have to change. But if I reflect on my own circumstances, right up to the time that I ceased being in government, when I was Foreign Secretary, I used to have my weekly surgery in my Edinburgh constituency, and it was effectively an open door. That I did not have personal protection protecting me at that time. However, some years later, when I was the MP for Kensington and Chelsea and things had moved on, then the constituency office in which I held my surgeries was closed. You had to ring a doorbell, you had to give advance notice that you wished to see the MP. And we were able to cope with that. Anybody who had a legitimate need to see me as their MP was able to do so, but they had to go through a procedure. They couldn't just walk in unexpected.
Well, that's a shame, is it?
I'm sorry?
Is that a shame, do you think?
Well, it's the real world in which we live.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, compared to the United States, for example, where the ease with which people can get weapons, guns of various kinds, including automatic weapons, is, you know, we well know that leads to vast numbers of crimes involving acts of violence, including weapons. Now, our rules on guns are infinitely stricter, same as most other Western countries, and that does reduce substantially the likelihood of a gun or a rifle being used against a public figure. Knives are a more serious problem, I would have thought. But also, you have to put this in perspective. We have had 3 or 4 members of parliament who have been killed. That is ghastly and horrible. But that's been over several years, and it's not as if we've got a pattern of behavior. Now, we don't know whether the individual being examined, I'm not going to comment on the detail for obvious reasons, but we don't know whether that individual is somebody with extreme views or whether they might have mental health problems or a combination of the two. So you have, and sometimes ordinary members of the public are suddenly attacked for no reason, nothing to do with their public role.
No.
So this is not a problem peculiar to people in public life, although obviously if you choose public life, you are more likely to say things or do things which upset some people with either mental health problems or extreme opinions.
Yeah, you have to accept a certain amount of risk in life. Before you go, Malcolm, we've been discussing England playing Argentina tonight, and one of the things we've been saying is when people live in the 4 corners of the country, what do they think about England? The Welsh people support, the Scottish people support. You mentioned that your Edinburgh constituency. Where do you stand when it comes to the England football team, Malcolm?
Well, I can easily answer that. First of all, I'm a Scotsman living in London. I have my father was Scottish, my mother was English. I have no compunction for supporting England. When it's playing Scotland, that's slightly different. Then that is a slightly more complex situation. So my birth country, Scotland, would probably take precedence.
But when it's England and Argentina, there's only one outcome.
Then I have no problems. Remember, I was a Foreign Office Minister during the Falklands War.
Yeah.
But that's got nothing whatsoever to do with what is happening today. But it's not too difficult for me to make up my mind.
Malcolm, good to speak to you. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
That's Malcolm Rifkind there, the former chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee. He says it's got nothing to do with it, the Falklands War, but what's interesting is that Argentina brings up the Falklands War far more than we do when it comes to the conversation.
Yeah, for some people it very much does.